You're a very well-known district in Southern California, probably one of the highest performing districts. And so, one of the misconceptions, I think, is that you might not necessarily need to worry about mental health.
People perceive that mental health and wellness isn't something more affluent communities deal with. For every kid that we know is having problems that have come to our attention, I believe and the data would show you, of course, would prove, because it's so significant and terrifying, that there's, dozens of other kids who are struggling at varying levels, maybe not so much that they're curled up in a fetal position or manifesting dangerous behaviors or verbalizing, the most scary, things that we hear from kiddos, including suicide ideation and some of those more terrifying realities of our world. Even kids at the highest levels are struggling with things, and we need to have a system where they know that there are resources available to them and their families.
Well, hello again. My name is Michael McCormick, and you are listening to the Superintendent Hot Seat, where bold superintendent leaders share real stories behind their most difficult challenges and decisions as they work to improve student safety, wellness, and attendance in a system not yet fully prepared to support those entering our schools. In today's episode, we're talking to Terry Walker, superintendent of the Irvine Unified School District. And Terry, the question I'm going to ask you, we're just going to dive right in, is what do you
Sure.
believe is the major shift our schools need to make to tackle the growing issues of anxiety, depression, bullying, and violence among students, which affect their ability to learn and feel safe, as well as teachers' capacity to teach effectively?
All right, that's a nice long question.
Right.
We'll be done in about 2.5 hours.
That's right.
No, thanks. It's an honor to be here, by the way. I love the work is so important in this conversation. It's funny, a lot of people think it started after the pandemic, and I'm like, oh no. So I've been in Irvine Unified for almost 30 years, the last 14 years as superintendent. I was in private sector before I decided to chase the big money and become a teacher. But, I think, to your question, what's missing or what's needed, I think, is a deep appreciation for the fact that when we talk about whether it's growth mindset or resilience and grit and all the different words that people throw around, having a really strong sense of confidence and connection and optimism and hope, whatever that looks like in the diverse students that we serve and the families that they're in, we need to appreciate that that is a fundamental and foundational condition for students thriving in every other aspect of their lives. And I think I think we do a good job, and we've done a nice job of responding to difficult challenges, including the pandemic, which was, of course, wildly disruptive. But what we don't do, I don't think, is a more intentional and proactive pushing in of services and awareness to young people. We're in a little bit more reactive mode. We tend to think that, academics are our primary function, which is fair. A lot of the metrics we get tested on or compared that people are looking at usually have to do with academic success in students. But what's not appreciated, I don't think, or at least wasn't until recently, is that how kids feel about themselves, their mental health and wellness impacts that. Even if all you care about is academics, you should care about mental health and wellness. And I certainly believe in Irvine, we've done a lot well before the pandemic, but definitely after and during. Expanded those services, expanded that awareness, including, SEL training and other programs and initiatives and resources to make sure our kids know that we're here for them and that it's okay to ask for help. It doesn't mean you're not resilient if you have bad days and things don't always go the way you want them to. And that's what I feel like we're still working on in lots of different areas of the organization.
Oh, I love that. And I think one of the things for context for the listeners and viewers is that you're a very well-known district in Southern California, probably one of the highest performing districts. In fact, I was just looking at U.S. News and World Report and the high school rankings for California. And several of your high schools are right up there near the top. And so, one of the misconceptions, I think, is that you might not necessarily need to worry about mental health and the struggles and challenges that your students face, uh, given that you're in this context of high performance.
Yeah.
And tell us why that's exactly the wrong thing to be thinking, Terry.
Well, just a number of different things, including the data. The data, I think most people might think, and in society, it's the same thing, right? People perceive that mental health and wellness isn't something more affluent communities deal with. That's absolutely not accurate. I think one of the things that, going back to even your early question, which is really it, many of our parents and our teams, we're very good at reacting. We're good at reacting when a kid is manifesting behavior that we're concerned about. And sometimes that red flag pops up as a kid starts having actual outward facing behaviors, or they start really struggling academically. And you're like, what's going on here? And then we tend to intervene, right? We tend to respond and go, oh, wow, I'm seeing signs of concern. Let's check in on that kiddo, or let's check in on their family. And unfortunately, that's only going to get you when kids are manifesting it out in front of you. And to me, it's the tip of the iceberg. For every kid that we know is having problems that have come to our attention, I believe there's a, and the data would show you, of course, would prove, because it's so significant and terrifying, that there's, dozens of other kids who are struggling at varying levels, maybe not so much that they're curled up in a fetal position or manifesting dangerous behaviors or verbalizing, the most scary, things that we hear from kiddos, including suicide ideation and some of those more terrifying realities of our world. But I feel like we're, again, if you look at mental health and wellness as a foundational prerequisite condition to optimal thriving for all human beings, then you weave it in. You weave it into what you do in classrooms to make sure kids feel seen and heard, and you weave it into your own mindset around, hey, even though this kid's in front of me, even a kid performing at the highest levels, back to your point, we're one of the highest performing school districts and always have been in the entire time I've been the superintendent. It's not because of me, but I certainly we haven't lost that. But even kids at the highest levels are struggling with things, and we need to have a system where they know that there are resources available to them and their families, and that and I feel like a little bit more proactive about building that into the conversation with kids as we prepare them for the future, especially as you and I both well know, the work that we've done over the years and will continue to do. The world that we're facing is so incredibly, it's evolving and adapting at such a pace. None of us experienced that when we were young people. So these young kids face an incredibly disruptive and volatile future that they need to be able to navigate. And in order to do that, again, you need to be able to be resilient. And resilience requires confidence and hope and optimism, because things aren't going to go the way you want them to. We don't even know where they're going next. And it's not just because of Chat GPT, but so yeah, I think there is this also a little bit of a stigma around, hey, we don't need to talk about this. Everything's fine. My kid's doing well. My kid's getting, all A's. It's like, I'm unfortunately, from my experience, some of our students who do some dangerous behaviors, or even the most tragic of behaviors, were some of those highest performing kids.
Yeah. I
So
think
to
there's
me,
a lot
no
of
one's insulated from this.
right. And I feel like, when you're serving in a community like Irvine, um, with a lot of affluence and a lot of pressure from parents for kids to you know be on the honor roll, take the most advanced classes that you offer. I'm sure you've got a ton of advanced placement programs and international baccalaureate programs, and kids are going through this process of doing college applications. In fact, this is the season right now where they're feeling this incredible pressure to satisfy or make their parents happy, make their parents' dreams come true, their dreams come true.
Yeah.
And what I noticed in working with high performing students is uh, one of the most crushing blows for kids can be getting their first B.
Oh,
And
sure.
what is the resilience that they've built in to be able to survive a disaster like
Yeah.
a bee.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking about as I was listening is these are the words of Linda Darling Hammond. Uh,
Mm,
we've inherited this legacy accountability system
mm,
in all the states across our nation, which is really based on, core academic performance. And that's what we're all measured on. Um, but I think that becomes kind of a narrow definition of what student success looks like. And I'm sure you and Irvine are spending some time thinking about broadening that definition of success for kids and really focusing on the whole child and what they can do, not just in terms of their success in those core academic subjects, but maybe they have passions elsewhere that aren't measured by that legacy accountability system. So, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, you said a couple things that I'd hit on. I mean, number one, I 100% agree. I mean, and I interact, I mean, obviously, we have almost 40,000 students in Irvine, and I've got, UCI and Concordia and Cal State Fullerton, so many amazing universities and junior colleges right around us. So I interact with higher ed all the time, and I interact with the business community. Um, and that was my background before I became a teacher. And we all know this. It's just interesting. Like you said, the system we're in right now, I often think because it's so focused on academics, because it's easier to measure those things. So when we know collaboration and creativity and critical thinking, some of that can be woven in a little bit into a system where that can be measured, because then that creates a grade, and that grade becomes your key to open this door or that door. And there's a little bit of competitiveness to it, to your point around what classes do you take and participating in this system and trying to be successful the way that the system's designed, and again attached to certain paths that people have shared as, hey, this is the path to success. And every family has to go through that. I don't ever lecture people about, hey, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. Like, hey, I have 4 kids of my own, 24 down to 16, and each one of them is on their own path, and everybody has to kind of navigate that. What I worry about a little bit, and I think I know it was really well documented in some of the research that's come out of like positive psychology. But I'm friends with Sean Acor, who wrote The Happiness Advantage, and he was at Harvard, and he said, what happens to a lot of kiddos is suddenly the reason that depression was so rampant at Harvard when he was there is because all of a sudden 99% of the students are no longer in the top 1%, even though they got there by being in the top 1%, and they'd hit a wall, because it's like, instead of being celebratory, like, hey, I accomplished this, here I am at Harvard. It's like, you would think, how could anyone be anything but elated and euphoric? Like, this is an amazing university. And I would argue, I hope if that's what you wanted and that was the fit for your path and all that kind of stuff, because Harvard is a place, not an interest. But hopefully, for the people that get in there, that's aligns with what they're trying to go. But that idea that like some of these kids are just so used to your point about the kid who first gets a B, it's like, hold on a second, we cannot be in a place where failing or falling even a little bit short of what your expectations are is somehow some fatal or tremendous setback. It's like your life is going to be full of, and it's part of the growth mindset stuff. Not there yet, near, you're almost there, not quite yet, or near misses, and all those. Those are all critically important, actually, so that you're not afraid to try new things. You're not afraid to be an intellectual risk taker. And so I just kind of worry how it all fits together. And I do. Anytime somebody narrowly defines either success or a kid's path, and I hear my own kids doing this too. Like, this is what I want to do. I'm like, that's great. You can think that, but be prepared to, because your path is not likely to be a straight line. It's likely to zigzag a little bit, right? And I would hate for you to miss a door that may be open for you. Now, you don't have to walk down that hallway, but you at least poke your head in and kind of like be open to it. There's so many different ways that things might shake out. And again, the broader topic around mental health and wellness, I feel like is, I don't know, sometimes people compartmentalize it into mental illness and depression and all that. I'm like, no, I think it's bigger than that. It's about, we've got young people who need to be prepared, not just for something. They need to be prepared for anything because of the way things are. So that's what I feel like. I'm not preparing you for just one thing. I want to be for you to be prepared. If you need to shift and pivot, um, then that you're comfortable with that, and or at least as comfortable as you can be, as well as a healthy appreciation that stress is not a bad thing. Stress is your brain telling you that something's important, but having it be so intense that it derails you from being able to be successful. Now we need to take a look at that. What's that about? And it's usually around a narrow, I believe, somebody narrowly defining what success looks like. So you can't deviate from this at all, whether it's a B or not being in the top 1% anymore at Harvard, all of a sudden means, oh, I guess I'm a loser now, or whatever the language is, unfortunately, that are, we can be our own worst and vicious critics. But that's what I worry about. And I think we need to be mindful of that. I also feel like just culturally, what we've done a good job at Irvine, and I hear other school districts kind of talking about the same thing, is just reminding ourselves what it's like to be a young person. I mean, you don't have the answers, and you've got, you know, maybe our kids have some perspective because they've got the internet and they can kind of explore things beyond what, you or I could have done when we were that same age because the internet wasn't around and all that. But I still feel like their perspective is so narrow, and it's a dangerous thing. And we need to just, try to help them broaden that and feel a little bit more comfortable with the zigging and zagging and the inherent discomfort that life is going to present.
Yeah, I call that embracing the squiggle.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks success is a straight line up and to the right on the graph. And it really is that. And so what are some things that you might be doing in terms of your district-wide initiatives
Yeah.
that
Well, yeah.
help kids kind of have that student agency, find
Yeah.
their voice, and be able to advocate for themselves
Yeah.
as they're in this kind of pressure cooker situation? Because one of my good friends, David Culberhouse, talks about the fact that there's more ambiguity and uncertainty in today's world than there ever has been. And so, how do we build that skill set? More specifically, how might you be building that skill set in your students in Irvine?
Yeah. Well, I think you've hit on it, and I think that's I love the embracing the squiggle. Sometimes, as superintendent says, we have to embrace the cactus, which is another one of my favorites. During the pandemic, we had to give that thing a deep embrace. It was real fun. Uh, Still pulling out some of those. But I think what needs to happen as a culture, as like anything, just like we are when we're focused on standards or focused on when we Common Core and all those kinds of things, you have to be intentional about it. It can't just be something you assume kids are going to pick up on. And you can't assume that these conversations are happening in the home. And I feel like it needs to be woven in again as a critical element of what we do to prepare students. In Irvine, we make a promise to provide the highest quality educational experience we can envision. And I'm sorry, my opinion maybe, but it seems to be supported, including by research and all that, that you can't have that highest quality educational experience if you don't have kids who have high levels of wellness, confidence, optimism, and it doesn't have to be perfect. But so I think there needs to be an intentionality. We have programs. I feel like like a lot of things, we triage things, right? We've got programs in place to make sure that if somebody knows that a student's struggling, speak up, we care, see something, say something, all those kinds of things give kids a clear message that, hey, if you see something and you're worried about it in your friend, or you need to reach out, here are resources. So we've got those kind of visual posters up and campaigns that happen on the campuses, and we make sure to the greatest extent possible, as that students run those. I could talk all day long about this, and I guarantee you, if there was a sophomore saying the similar things that I'm saying, it'd be maybe even more powerful, at least in the eyes of other students. That peer-to-peer kind of thing, I think, is important. And Hope Squad and just different kinds of clubs on campus where that's a priority, and staff development, professional learning around recognizing why this is important, very specific strategies that our teachers use to make kids feel connected. And I think this, Mike. I mean, it's harder at secondary because the teachers just have more kiddos, right? They may be working upwards almost 200 kids by the time all of those class periods are over, and that's a lot of kiddos to make that kind of one-on-one connection. But there's really best practices and proven practices to make that connection feel real. We do a lot of surveying as well, a lot of conversations with our students. We have student advisory forums where we bring in representatives from all the high schools, and they have real candid conversations about any number of topics to help us try to better communicate. Those surveys help us to kind of see where some of our weak spots are, and some of them are district wide. Again, big district, 45 schools, so a lot of data to look at, but also you could drill down into each individual school and say, what's going on here? I'll just give you one data point that I thought got a lot of our attention, where a lot of our students, too many of our students, I think it was around 35%. So over a third of our kids at too many of our schools said that there wasn't a trusted adult that they had on campus. I'm like, wow, not one?
Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
That's crazy, right?
And it just means you need to be more intentional about saying, hey, I'm a trusted adult. I know you don't know who I am, or that counselor, or in our district, again, another, as you know, many of us have invested. I feel like Irvine did it well before the pandemic, and we just kept going with it. We have mental health specialists now at all of our middle schools and high schools. We have elementary resource counselors helping work with our families, and students are really manifesting concerning behavior and challenges at the elementary level, but making sure that people are aware of those resources and that they need to tap into those. So those surveys, I think, help us a lot. I think we're getting better. We're using some new systems right now where we get a couple touch points on the students to give us some feedback about whether it's a trusted adult, or do you feel safe on campus, or do you feel respected, or any of those kinds of things. Those are all important things for us to look at. And I feel like in this age of technology, we could get better at that too, right? More intentional, more integrated, so it doesn't feel like this one-off thing. And that's what we're working on. I mean, it's a labor of continuous improvement. So the work will never be done. We'll always just keep getting better and better at it, as you know. But I feel like that's the missing piece for me. More day to day, woven into the day, opportunities for us to both show kids, hey, this is what it looks like. Like we do that with behavior, with positive behavior intervention systems, PBIS. I don't know that we do it with mental health and wellness as much as we should, right? Some of those opportunities to make it part of the lesson so that kids collaborate better and communicate better. So I think that's where we're moving to, but we've done a lot to build capacity. We've got work to do though. And I don't know that anyone would ever be, like I said, be done with this. I just think there's a lot of opportunity to make sure students are sharing with us what their experience looks like, and then gives us an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Terry, I'm going to pause here and we'll continue this amazing conversation after a quick 30-second break from a message from our producer, Muzoom, a company rethinking student wellness with bite-sized Netflix-style behavior modeling videos, where students can watch peers facing similar challenges and gain fresh perspectives on resolution. It's the only SEL platform that's truly click and play, enabling teachers to deliver a full SEL lesson in 15 minutes or less.
Creating a safe, supportive environment is key to our learners' success. With nearly every district prioritizing social-emotional well-being to reduce suspension rates, decrease chronic absenteeism, and improve academic performance, the challenge is how to achieve this without adding to your staff's workload. Discover Muzoom, a groundbreaking student-driven platform that uses real-world choose-your-own-adventure bite-sized movies to make SEL engaging for students, easy for teachers to teach, and more cost-effective for districts to implement. Check out Muzoom today.
All right, I'm back with Terry Walker, Superintendent of the Irvine Unified School District. Terry, you mentioned a gentleman by the name of Sean Acor, and I grabbed a quote from him, and it's this quote: "Happiness is the joy you feel moving towards your potential." How has that kind of shaped your thinking and the things you're trying to do in Irvine Unified?
Yeah, I feel like, the joy any person feels. I don't care if you're 80 or 5-year-old in kindergarten is feeling like you're putting your best foot forward, and you're making a difference, and that you're growing, and you're able to persevere when facing challenges and those kinds of things. And to me, I mean, I've spent a lot of time going through my own journey as a human being, as we all do, obviously wanting to be happy, even kind of listening to the words that we use, right? And whether it's resilience and grit and or happiness, and say, well, then what does that look like in practice, right? Or what are some strategies we might use as human beings to kind of to manage the journey that we're on? And I feel like that's in Sean's quote, right? It's like this sense, you don't have to have arrived. I don't think you arrive and then just sit there in happiness. I think it's a daily endeavor. It includes habits of mind, personality, things that you need to be aware of, and we're all a little bit different, so we all may need to like manage a little bit how our little inner voice talks to us,
Oh boy.
and be a little bit more
Yes.
thoughtful about what maybe that inner voice is saying, that either inner
Yeah.
critic.
I
And I think he's right. And to me, I think sometimes for me, and for others probably, the happiness would come if I could feel a little bit more peace, a little bit less like, there's so much on my plate and it's overwhelming or something like
yeah.
that.
I don't know if I'm going to say something that I've often said to principals, but then I want to personalize it even more. What I've said to principals, and I was, similarly, I was in my school district almost 30 years, 27 years served in the district, last 9 as superintendent. And the only principals that we ever really saw get into trouble in terms of retaining their job were those principals that never got comfortable walking in their own shoes. And, staff had a very hard time gauging who they were as a human being, and kind of realizing that childhood experience that we all carry with us and that little inner voice. I'm kind of conflating some things here, but that was advice that I gave to principals, and now kind of taking that to the superintendency. And frankly, it was my wife of 37 years who said, you need to be very sure of who you are as a human being, because when you're superintendent, there's going to be a lot of people who are not going to be happy with you just by nature of the position that you carry. And you're going to be tested. And sometimes we would get tested, even at board meetings where, there's those moments where I call them career defining moments where that you really need to stand in your truth and speak up for what you believe is right for kids. And so I found myself in my 50s probably becoming more self-aware of who I was. It's easy to be self-aware of the accomplishments and the things that people see publicly. But I'm talking about the type of self-awareness where I had to deal with some of my own childhood trauma. Because when you get in those stressful situations, that little voice inside your head tells you a certain story based on your past experiences. And so I've given you a lot there, Terry, but talk about that little voice in your head and the development that you may have had to do as you've been serving for superintendent for the past 14 years. And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, and especially during the pandemic, right? I mean, that would put a strain on anyone, and it really was a very, very significant one. And you started off kind of talking about, at any given time, just because the likelihood of ever having 100% agreement with our decisions it's almost never, right?
Yeah.
And so you're always dealing with, and hopefully it's only 10 or 20% of people don't think it's a great idea and they want to be vocal about it, but I've got, almost 40,000 students. So 10% is 4,000. That's a lot of noise. So during COVID in particular, was probably a little bit larger than 10%. And, at least half of those people were super upset. So you had about 2,000 people just really not happy on either end too, right? So
Right.
saying, hey, we should be more this way or there the other way. But in general, around your question, I think, and just, to me, it helps me frame what I want to be as a leader, right? As we're leading an organization that serves students at a range that's, now we got 4-year-olds, and with our SPED kids, we, well beyond 18, but that's a big pocket of time for a young person's journey. And we need to be mindful of what our influence can be on that. Every conversation can stick with a kid. I guess the thing for me that I've spent some time kind of peeling the onion and looking back at kind of some things is being real more aware. And I do think it's a pretty staggering gap in what we talk to kids about, in really being mindful about what you're allowing to occupy your mind. What are you allowing this narrative to be inside your head? Because you are in charge of that. I mean, we find oftentimes we let our brains and our minds hijack us in some ways. We don't even check it. It's just running amok, and we're kind of we have a front row seat to something that feels outside of us. It's like, wait, this is happening in my own head. And it can maybe sometimes make us feel like we're, going a little crazy or a little stressed, and we're just, our amygdala gets. I just feel like we need to spend more time helping people understand how their brain works. And I do worry that too often, and I've done this with people before, you should try this, or the audience can try this. You can ask people, you say, hey, think about all the people in your life. And there's a way to tee it up in a certain way that makes them thinking more focused inwardly, where you're like, who are like, the top critics in your life? Like, who are they? Who are the people that kind of, when you make a mistake, they're right there and they're kind of pointing at it, or they've always been kind of reminding you of some of your deficiencies. Again, there's a way to create this prompt where a lot of people, they choose themselves, right? They're like, I'm my most vicious critic. Most people would agree with that on a Likert scale. They say, yeah, I strongly agree with that. I'm more vicious with myself than I would ever be with a loved one or a friend. And then you can ask, okay, so talk about who are your main cheerleaders? Who are the people in your life who like pick you up and like when things are down and help you to be resilient or help you to bounce back and be positive and know that, hey, this is temporary. We're going to get through this, all that kind of stuff. And so people can write down these names and stuff like that. Well, in that second group, the cheerleaders, guess who almost no one picks?
Themselves.
Themselves.
Yeah.
And it's so sad. It hits me every time, actually. I'm like, and if you think about a little kiddo, and again, going back to that first thing, you're watching this experience. You're telling the story to yourself about what this experience means. You're assigning meaning to it and emotion to it. And we don't help kids to kind of manage that. I think that's wrong, not just as it relates to academics, because life is it's about work and being productive and all that kind of stuff. And we've got a whole life outside of that, where I would argue, and so would Sean Acor and many, many others in the world of positive psychology and beyond. The number one thing that will end up being, as you look back on your life, that was it a great life or not, is relationships. We're not testing on relationships, but some of this SEL work we're doing is critically important. How can they work together? What does that look like? How do we be more intentional about weaving that into our conversations with kids about as they're forming their identity, as they're forming how they talk to themselves, and some of those habits of mind that are social in nature, about how do they interact with others, as well as how they emotionally interact with themselves. And I feel like, and I think it is, or I know it is, the reason, as we know, social media and smartphones, and then COVID and the pandemic and isolation, all of these things have kind of created a new environment right now that we're still trying to understand. But to me, it's so essential that we do that. And so many adults that are in therapy and all that, they still don't have those skill sets. And to me, why are we waiting until someone's struggling before we then have these
Give them the
opportunities to
keys.
really reflect on that instead of doing it early in schools?
Yeah.
We've got kids for so long. Weave it in, and kids will be better students anyway. And we get so focused on minutes and maximizing every second that we don't realize, if you set the stage with this, the kids are going to maximize the rest of the time better. So,
And that's right. The kids will maximize the time. And actually, I think it makes the teacher's job easier when you've got kids that are ready to learn and all that means. So what, who do you turn to, Terry? I mean, you've survived the pandemic. We're now in post-pandemic recovery. You've been there the whole time as superintendent, leading this, what would be considered a really massive school district when you think about scale across the U.S. I mean, 40,000 students. Who do you turn to when you feel like things aren't quite going your way? We're not. People think superintendents are walking around on a winning streak all the time, and that couldn't be further from the truth.
right. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think I've gotten better at recognizing when I need to reach out to someone. That's another thing. And I think, again, I'll relate it to myself throughout my life, including now. And I think other students and people in general, even if we're not talking about students, we suffer in silence way too often.
That's right.
We think it's a sign of weakness to ask for help. We think something's wrong with us, or we don't want to expose what we're worried about because it makes us seem weak or inept or whatever it is. So I've just gotten better at recognizing in that moment where I need to kind of bring somebody else in and ask for that support. And then I think people need to really have a clear sense about what does their network look like? What does their support system look like? And because in some circumstances, it may be that friend over there. And in other circumstances, it may be a family member, a loved one that is, has that kind of insights and background and unconditional love and support that you really need in that moment. Or maybe it's not help as much as just like, help me to just bear through this, right? To gut through this, as one of my close friends talks about all the time. And I'm like, if you're ever gutting through something, if I can help at all, I'd like to know at least, and I don't know how I'll help you except to just say, hey, you're going to get through this. You've gotten through so many other things before, and just remind people of that. So I think it really starts with first acknowledging when you need support, and then make sure you're there for other people, and make sure that invitation's there too. I think that's another thing we don't do, and maybe we've gotten better at it as a school district. Instead of waiting for someone to ask for help, we initiate an introduction. Say, hey, if you ever needed help, I want to be a trusted adult, or your teacher could be a trusted adult, or your family could be a trusted adult. But tell somebody. Being alone is the most, that's when kids lose hope the fastest. We all feel a little bit more desperate, a little bit less likely to kind of pull out of that tailspin, that downward spiral that we can get into. And to me, then you just kind of fill it in and have people in your life that care about you, and then you can be honest with, that's the other part. I do worry sometimes, both adults and kids, we're so busy creating a persona and an outward facing image that we can't just be honest about the fact that, hey, I'm struggling with this, and I'm hurting, and COVID made me feel like that. I will say, a bunch of different times. Here I was, and I never worked a day from home. I came into this office every day, and
like so many superintendents, a lot of us were coming
I wanted
in
to, anytime
regularly.
people drove by, I wanted them to see that the lights were on and someone's here, and we know that they're doing work in that capacity. And but it was hard because there was just so much negativity, and I wallowed in it a little, probably too much.
Yeah.
And that some of it was unavoidable, of course. But when people are going through something that hard, they need to tap into their support system, and people need to know how to give support, by the way. Not everyone's good at it, right? You always hear that from people, like, hey, don't just jump into problem solving mode. Sometimes someone just may need a shoulder to lean on, or they just want to unload this for a second. And you can just say, hey, just so you know, that's a lot. And I get why you feel this way. That this is not unusual that you're feeling this way, right? You're not a weirdo for being so sad or upset by this. This is a very tough thing, and anyone would be feeling the same. Sometimes that's enough too, to just,
given that, Terry, what's the greatest misperception that others have about you?
That's a good one. Let me do a quick survey here really quick. I should be able to get it back. Someone said something to me, and I don't know, you we haven't mentioned this yet, but I've announced my retirement from Irvine.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so thank
Congratulations.
you. I'm proud. It's time for me to go on and do other things, but I think probably the misperception that the people even closest to me might have is just they're like, yeah, you just seem like you're just so confident, that you've just got it. You just seem like, you're unflappable and indomitable. And I certainly think I'm strong and I've weathered a lot of things, which has made me stronger. But just like anyone, I have dark days, and I need to catch that little, demon voice, an inner critic that's a little bit, unrealistic about how things need to be going. And so I think that's probably it. And I think we all do that a little bit. Like we see other people. I think social media, for sure, for kids, accentuates that. Like, oh God, everybody's happy but me. Like, no, no, no. We all go through things, and there's seasons, and there's highs and lows. As part of the squiggle you talked about. And sometimes the squiggle isn't just going like this; it's going like this,
That's
and
right.
then maybe have a little bit of straight, and then it does it again. But hopefully not too much unrest and challenges that kids face. But
Yeah.
that's probably the biggest thing, and I often joke, and I joke to that person. I'm like, well, I'm glad that my outward facing facade of
It's working.
you know complete confidence and courage was always there. But I will say also, maybe it's because I do feel it in this organization, um, and I do think it's something important, and very much connected to relationships, as you know. Like I never felt alone in this job because the people around me, this the amazing team we had, and amazing board members, and the staff I knew were out at schools. Like that made me always feel like I wasn't here by myself. I may be the one taking the most slings and arrows because I'm out in front, and that's a natural place. But I shared it that with people, and people were there to kind of, provide that kind of support. I think that's
Yeah.
how we make sure people aren't feeling a sense of
Well,
hopelessness.
yeah, and you just jog my memory too, because I think one of the things is as superintendent, you wear that and that's what you signed up for, and that's what we do. But I think one of the things that people don't quite understand, and I would even say this about boards of education, is when they're taking shots at the superintendent, what they don't often realize is they're actually taking shots at the entire cabinet team, realizing that we work very closely together with one another.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things can be devastating to the entire cabinet leadership or the executive leadership team,
Yeah.
because yes, you're out in front, leading the parade, but you've got a team of tight knit people that very much want to see the entire organization succeed. And so that affects them as well when these negative comments are happening from the public, and sometimes from internal staff too. I don't know about you, but in my school district during the pandemic, some of the greatest critics were our very own staff,
Yeah.
with ideas about how we should be, you know, kind of getting through that journey of the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially in an environment where so little was under our control, right?
Right.
And oftentimes we're getting, even conflicting guidelines. We're like, wait,
Right.
obviously people creating these guidelines don't work in schools because these two things can't be
Don't
together at the same
coincide
time.
with each
That isn't
other.
how
Yeah.
it works. And they're like, oh, it doesn't. And you're like, oh my goodness, here we go. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think I don't know. Going back to even to the SEL stuff and how do we participate? And obviously we know we've got a pretty intensely divided country, or it feels that way right now. And I think social media and the algorithms of extremism are perpetuating and exaggerating that sense of disconnect. I feel like most of us are often a lot closer in alignment with how we think, including during COVID. I think most people kind of understood it. No one needed to be happy about it because it was a very significant and disruptive event. And I feel like we as a cabinet team and as a board and as like staff, like what we needed to do is just kind of say, hey guys, we're going to do this. We're going to weather this together. And if you've got feedback on ways that we could do it better, I'm all ears. I might not, me listening I'm going to listen, but just because I don't do what you say doesn't mean I didn't listen, because listening and obeying do not mean the same thing.
Right, right.
And we're going to try and weigh the interests of a lot of diverse feedback, and make sure we do the best we can to meet the needs of our students. And
So true.
I just feel like, people who work in education, to your point, we dedicate our lives at all levels, even if you're on the periphery of anything that affects students directly, and you're there to kind of help us, people like me, be organized and maximize my day by making sure I don't lose track of all these other things, that all these other plates that are spinning. I'm not spinning a lot of those because other people are helping me to do that, or helping other members of our team to do that. But I mean, deep down, what I really wish people, maybe this goes to an earlier question you asked, what I really wish people understood is that you don't go into this, and you certainly don't rise up and become an administrator in most cases, unless you're somebody who deeply, deeply cares about serving students and serving families. And I'm certainly very proud that in our cabinet team, we've stayed a cohesive group for a very, very long time. And we, really care about one another, and we protect one another and support one another. And I just wish more people understood that. If you could give them kind of a behind the scenes thing, like most people don't even know, pandemic or not, the depth of commitment and dedication that exists with people who work in education, and teachers and staff and principals and so many others that just, they pour their lives into,
Yeah.
maybe literally, actually,
Yeah. Oh,
having
yeah.
had some health problems myself,
Oh,
where
yeah.
you're like literally, we're putting in a lot of time, and that time's taken its toll, and we couldn't be more proud of the work that gets done, including in this very important topic that you're covering today.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Terry, it has been an absolute honor to spend some time with you today. We always wrap up with just a couple of rapid fire questions, and then I got one more after that. So here's the rapid fire stuff.
Okay.
These are just quick answers. First thing that comes to mind: Coke or Pepsi?
Pepsi, just because that's what my dad drank. I don't drink either, but
Yeah. Are you a sweet or salty snacker?
salty.
Salty all the way. That's good stuff. And mountains or beach?
Oh, that's so brutal. I surf, and then I like to ride my mountain bike in the mountains. I like mountainous beach areas.
The mountain. And you know what? In California, that's entirely possible. I was
That's
just
right.
in Santa Cruz, and you've got pine trees right across from the coast. So
Yep.
it is possible. Oh, that's fantastic. And the last question I've got for you, Terry, today is, what are you most grateful for?
I have 4 kids, so it'd be impossible not to. And now I'm a grandfather, so he'll be 1 years old in
Congratulations.
January. Yeah. Then they named him Walker. So that's very nice, because my daughter, we have a son-in-law now. So those are probably my greatest joys, and watching them grow into young adults, or be young adults and building their lives. That's probably my greatest joy.
Yeah, isn't that fantastic? Yeah, it's interesting. Just a final comment that it's our own partners, whether it be a spouse or a partner in our life, our family. My wife would tell me, like, when you come to the end of your life, Mike, you know who's going to be there for you? It's going to be your family.
Yeah.
And we dedicate our lives to public service, and as you so eloquently stated, for all of us, it's really been our life's work and our life passion to serve our communities and our students. And but I think at the end of the road, it is your family, your own family, who will be there to push you around in a wheelchair, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
All righty, sir. Great chatting with you today. This has been another episode of the Superintendent's Hot Seat with Terry Walker.
Thanks, Mike.